You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast, book lovers. You're going to be pretty excited about who we have with us here today. Kristen and I truly adored this book. We were thrilled to get the advanced reader's copy. You're going to love it. We're here with Emiko Jean. Emiko, thank you for joining us today. She's got a new book coming out. It's called The Return of Ellie Black. It is a thriller like none other. I can't stop talking about it. Before we went live here today, I'm telling Emiko my own personal stories. This is something that just gets us excited, especially being women. I think we can relate to this book. Super happy to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. I'm thrilled, no pun intended. To be here. And
we love puns.
I appreciate both of you reading the book and loving it so much and wanting to talk to me about it. So thank you.
Well, before we get started, we'd like to tell our listeners a little bit about you. You know, a lot of people pick up the book and maybe look at the back cover, your little bio, but, you know, you've got some pretty impressive things that you've accomplished here that are worth making sure everyone's aware of. So as you maybe already know, Emiko Jean is a New York Times bestselling author of adult, but also young adult fiction. Her books have been published in more than 30 languages. Wow. Her work has been featured on GMA, Good Morning America Book Club pick, which we love because we take a lot of Jenna's picks as our own picks. She's also been a Reese Witherspoon pick. We also fully often agree with Reese, sometimes picking the book before or after her. You had a young adult with Reese, an adult with GMA. She's been in publications like Marie Claire, Entertainment Weekly, Time, Cosmo, Shondaland, and Bustle. Wow, a lot of great places. She lives in Washington with her husband and 2 kids. We're super excited to dive down into this.
Absolutely. Emiko, we'd like to give a little bit of a summary for our listeners of what's happening in the book, just so they can have, you know, some of that background and understand what we're talking about, but we will not give away any spoilers. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell our listeners a little bit about this beautiful story, The Return of Ellie Black. In your story, we meet Detective Chelsea Calhoun, and her life one day is turned upside down when she gets a call that a young woman who had disappeared years earlier has resurfaced in the woods of Washington State. Now, this is a shock to everybody, but particularly for Chelsea, because it brings up a number of questions about not only her disappearance, but maybe even the disappearance of other young women from the same area. Now, this detective has a very personal connection. 20 years before, her own sister had vanished when they were teenagers. And ever since then, she has been looking, for signs, for clues, trying to figure out what could have happened to her sister. Probably motivated a lot of her work that she chose to go into, the detective work. Now, Ellie, who had disappeared without a trace, is not saying too much. And maybe things are getting a little concerning. I think Chelsea is wondering if there's more to the story. What is she not telling them? She knows that she needs to get to the bottom of what happened. But as she does, she starts to unearth secrets and all kinds of darkness, even throughout her entire town, that is starting to surface. We are hanging on until the end of this story. And I don't want to give away spoilers, but do you want to add anything to that summary?
No, I think you did an excellent job. I'm always, I wrote the book, but there was a whole team that went into kind of writing the synopsis of it and everything like that and packaging it up. And they did such a great job encapsulating the story. So I don't have anything to add other than it's a page turner. It's twisty. And, I hope it keeps, readers guessing until the very end.
It does.
Oh,
It does.
definitely.
And if that synopsis, Kristen is so good at these synopses, if
Mhm.
that didn't pique your interest, this discussion is going to. Because like I said, as a human being, or even especially as a woman, this book hits home. I want to start out talking about survival. Ellie thinks they have never seen such an ugly thing as surviving. The reader put some thought in time into this. What are our methods of survival? You could think, okay, kidnapping, but what about in cases like abuse, in violence, in war, in poverty? What does it take for the victim to cross over the line of logic and sanity and enter a Stockholm syndrome where we begin to rely and ultimately sympathize or care for our captor? And I had to add to that, is there a way to defend ourselves from this? Or is this survival at its most desperate point? And I have a feeling you did some research on these survival techniques because they were very wise in this book and very real. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, without going into spoilers, much is asked of our heroine Ellie in terms of survival. And I focus more on exploring the psychological rather than the physical, although there are elements of physical survival, of course, in Ellie's journey. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the term, fight or flight. But in researching, I found in addition to that, which is freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze. And Ellie uses all three of these, throughout the book. And I think a lot of us have, but to a much lesser degree in our lives. There are times where we kind of resort back to like this primitive brain, right? Where we only have like kind of these very basic responses to survive. In regard to Stockholm syndrome, I don't know why. It's unknown why like some people develop it and others don't. It's been pretty widely studied. I'm not an expert on it. I mean, I researched a lot of it for the book, but I'm certainly not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. And, I think with Ellie identifying with her captor is how she mitigates, the stress and trauma of her experience. Um, and something interesting that I found out was in researching for this book, it's actually not classified as a mental health condition, but as a response. And I thought that distinction was really interesting. So I don't know if like you can defend against developing that, as like Stockholm syndrome is considered a defense and coping mechanism in itself. And it can also, I also found out too in researching that it can develop in a variety of situations. So like Ellie's, example is extreme, but evidence of Stockholm syndrome can be found in abusive relationships and even in, toxic work environments.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. I love that you did that, Emiko. And you know what else you did? You made us think about what we might be capable of. We
Mhm.
crawl in the character and we think, I hope I could be that strong. Would I be that strong?
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing, but it sort of gives people hope that we don't want to encounter this desperate situation. Of course, we don't. But if we ever were to, it gave us the idea that maybe we could survive somehow.
I think that's why, I think that's why true crime is so fascinating.
Mhm.
And if you look at the demographics, the audience of true crime, it's about 80% women. And I mean, you're nodding your heads. I can see you nodding your heads. Where I'm going with this is that these are really kind of primers for us as women on how not to be killed, how to survive, in these situations. And in addition to that, I think that because we live in this society with violent men where there are threats all the time, we empathize with, the women in these stories. So we empathize with Ellie and what she's gone through. We empathize with Chelsea and what she's gone through, having been touched by violence through her sister.
Absolutely.
Emiko, I want to dive into something you just said a little deeper. Over 250,000 women went missing in 2022 alone, with the vast majority of them being under 21. What is fueling these atrocities? Is this primarily an expression of male rage or an assertion of power? And do you think we need to start understanding some of those preliminary factors, like what drives this type of aggression, to start understanding these numbers? These are astonishing numbers.
Yeah. So if you Google search the biggest threat against women, the answer is violence most often perpetrated by men. And I did a reverse on this where I Google searched the same thing, but replaced women with men, and it's health-related conditions like heart disease and strokes.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, it is a fact that 1 in 3 women will be raped or beaten in their lifetime. And I believe this can be attributed to, our unequal power dynamic in society. Our, culture is shaped by patriarchy. And I believe the prevention starts with equality and dismantling misogyny. And part of that, I think the biggest part is raising our boys differently. There's a section in the book where Chelsea is having a conversation with her father, and he's saying all these things about her sister Lydia. He's saying Lydia should not have gone here. Lydia should not have done this. Lydia should not have. And Chelsea internally thinks maybe we should worry less about what our daughters are doing and more about what our sons are doing and how to raise them differently. In my own life, I have a son, and I have tried very hard to teach him the importance of consent, to value women as individuals, and see them beyond wives and mothers and sexual objects. I mean, he's 6, so we haven't really gotten into the deep of it, but you have to be intentional with your parenting. And I think we can do better for our girls.
What an excellent point. And two, I think a lot of people often look at rape or this kind of an assault as a sexual thing. And I think we have to understand there's that deeper issue of aggression and power, not necessarily a sexual thing. So to talk about how women are inviting that by the way they dress or, the circumstances they're in, I think we're missing the point. Yeah. So that's a really excellent point you brought up.
You came to the right place, because BOOKSTORM Podcast, Kristen and I are very big believers in women empowerment. And we love pulling this out of books whenever we can, because we still believe that women are a minority and are persecuted in some ways. So I love a book that says this. I got to bring in this little quote. Ellie thinks there are bad people everywhere. The truth is they are not strangers. They are men who you slept with, men who you work with, men you raise. That I had that written down. I'm like, yes, isn't that true? What can we do as women? Thank you for bringing that out. Hugely important.
Yeah, we should demand more of our men.
Absolutely. Now let me just go into a little something else you touched upon, something that the father was doing. Do we have any right whatsoever to victim blame? This hit me strong in the story. And I thought about when I watch news reports and news stories, do I do this? I think I do a little bit. We say, well, maybe they shouldn't have gone there alone. Well, maybe they shouldn't have trusted. Maybe they shouldn't have engaged. But can a victim ever be blamed? Isn't that lessening the fault of the assailant? Or are we also responsible for our well-being? This is a tricky balance right there.
Right. So I think we need to make the distinction that there's a difference between, someone standing on an edge of a cliff and jumping up and down, right? So we would probably most likely say that's a dumb idea. And, whatever happens is kind of, not well deserved, but, you can kind of see the writing on the wall. And a girl going to find an unoccupied bathroom, which is what Ellie is doing when she's kidnapped. We have so many rules for girls, like, don't wear this, don't walk here, check in with friends before going on a date, have an exit plan if things get, rough. All these kind of rules, don't accept drinks from strangers. So many more rules for girls than for boys. And, on the flip side of that, I think this is a good place for us to discuss like hindsight bias. So that's the phenomenon when something is foreseeable only after it's passed. That quote, hindsight is always 2020. So this is a major contributor to victim blaming. And so we've kind of created this narrative in our society that it's up to girls not to get raped and not to get killed. And it's a false narrative. It's, and Ellie is, it's so pervasive that Ellie, in her own, story and telling it, she's saying she shouldn't have gone, out to go to the bathroom, that she blames herself. And what a powerful thing patriarchy has done that by like convincing us women that it's our fault, when something bad like that happens to us, when it's not. It's, the onus is on the perpetrator.
Thank you for that. I always thought this, and Kristen will shed more light on this, being that she's a lawyer, but I always think of, in a rape case, people love to say, what were you wearing?
Yeah.
And then you show up in court and they don't say, put on the same outfit that you had on that day, dress conservative in a suit. But I don't know why this is like a pet peeve of mine. And I always think, who cares what I wore? It doesn't matter what I wore. I don't care if I wore a bikini and I had to go and get the mail. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean any right for you to commit a crime. This is where it gets a little tricky. What do you think about that, Kristen? Maybe you could shed some light there.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Because even in the 1980s, we still were asking women about their sexual history up on the stand. And
Wow.
that's just mind blowing to me.
Wow.
Making that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a long way to go. So
we're getting there. We're getting there.
We're
Thanks
getting
to,
there.
Thanks
We're
to,
getting
guess
there.
what?
And, having these honest conversations is part of that. But, and we've gone far, but we can still go farther.
And thanks to books like this that bring out issues like this that we need to discuss. It's a great book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, you really handled a lot of very interesting themes. And I want to dive into one other one that really caught my eye. And that was the daughter-father relationship that we saw played out in this book. And do you think that relationship between a daughter and a father really shapes your perception of men in the future? And do you think, in terms of Chelsea and her father, that she was very determined to make up for the loss that the family had experienced, and that also shaped that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely parents play, pivotal roles in our lives. And, they do shape who we become, and the relationships that we forge, they influence those. But more so, I wanted to explore in this book how we tend to lionize fathers and villainize mothers. If you look at like any fairy tale, like if you look at like there's like the evil witch or the fairy godmother, and so there's never kind of any in between for women. But most of the time, the fathers are heroes. And how little is expected of men to be good parents, and how much we expect of women in the same regard. In Chelsea's case, she casts her father as a hero, and she wants to walk in his footsteps. He's a police chief, and so she enters the force to kind of make him proud. And he had this weird dynamic with her that the less love he showed, the greater his approval meant to her. And this is all kind of part of the toxic masculinity that's explored in the book. How it leaks into families and how Chelsea suffers from it. Throughout the book, she narrates that she's kind of taught herself not to cry and have this like stiff upper lip. And that's from her dad. She was taught to kind of shut off that emotional valve, and is shamed by her father when she does.
Yeah, that is such an excellent point, because, I don't know what is driving that, but there certainly is maybe a need in daughters to want to have that male attention, that approval by a father. And maybe we already have the approval from a mother, so we don't think we need to seek it out. I don't know if that's perhaps what's driving that, but I absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
I wonder if sometimes we feel more secure in our attachments to our moms, And so there's more freedom to kind of let them down or to go farther from them. I think, again, because our society teaches, men and boys, to be less emotional, that, sometimes we really try to seek that from our fathers because there's an absence of that. And I'm not saying, all of the statements that I make aren't blanket statements. We know that all men aren't like that. And we know, but there is a societal pressure for men to be hyper masculine and to not show emotion. And when that happens, there's all sorts of far reaching consequences.
Absolutely. In fact, we saw that with Chelsea. She was really struggling and wanting to emulate her father in those masculine ways were maybe not consistent with who she really was designed to be as a person. And so you come to that little tension.
Yeah. She wants to seek love and to be loved. She wants to have a good relationship with her husband. She's deeply affected by, what has happened to Ellie and other women. And at the end, it turns out that she can't shut that emotional valve off. And once she actually allows herself, to pursue it, it actually becomes like her greatest strength, I think, as a character, because she goes the distance to help these girls.
Yeah.
Don't tell too much.
I know.
Can't tell too much.
Maybe cut that.
We loved it.
Your book, we loved it because you really do examine kind of the aftermath of tragedy in some respects, which I think is it's a little different take on some of the stories and the true crime stories that we also love to read. But we loved it. And we'd like to know if you can give us a clue on what you're working on next. I know it's always tricky, but we always want to know what's on your radar.
Yeah. So I have, there's going to be another Chelsea Calhoun novel. So Chelsea is, the detective in this book, and we're going to follow her and see what she does. She's going to have a new case, maybe a new partner. And again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I've just finished the draft of that and I'm revising it. And then I'm going to have another young adult book come out, I think in the next year or two. We're still trying to pin down the pub date, but yeah.
Excellent. Oh, that's so exciting. And we hope that you come back and talk with us on Bookstore. We loved having you. And I'd like to tell our readers how to connect with you. First of all, you have a beautiful website, Emiko Jean, JEAN.com. So readers and listeners, please go visit the website. You're on Instagram, you are on Facebook. And again, we hope that you come back and visit us real soon. We just love talking about this book. It was excellent.
Loved it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate chatting with you.
Well, Kristen, this is a book like that. We love to talk about this kind of stuff. And there's one thing that we just didn't have enough time to go into all of the aspects. Let's talk a little bit about the profiling of a predator. We don't really talk about that much. Chelsea wondered, does he think he loves his victim? Does he fear being abandoned? And you brought this up a little. Men like this, misogynists, disempower women, strip them of their self-confidence, their security, until the women are reliant upon them. Is it possible to profile someone like this, do you think? Or is this a psychopath, a person who is so mentally ill that they do not fit into the profiling category of normal?
That's a good question. All I know is I think profiling is more of a science than we realize. And I think we know more about these aberrant behaviors than people suspect we do. Because first of all, we saw some generational aspects here. And we know that certain things that happen in your childhood feed into certain behaviors as an adult. So right there is a pathway to starting to profile what we might be expecting to see. And again, here there was we kind of got a whole big picture of what was going on. She really dives very deep into the psychological aspects for many people. I think that's one of the things I really enjoyed about this book.
I love a psychological thriller because we can all either relate to it or in our lives, we know someone who maybe borders these characters and we can see this in other people. So do you believe then, and I think this is true, even erratic, volatile personalities have habits, traits, and commonalities that can be profiled. Maybe there are specific types of psychotic people that all in some range behave similarly enough to narrow it down. This is a fascinating field that I wish I would have gone into. This profiling, it just blows my mind.
Yeah. In fact, I read once where, for example, if you are a child of parents who were both alcoholics and you had not a lot of steadiness and stability and control in your life, you start to exert extreme control in your own life. So where we start to see these things organized, maybe there's somebody who starts stashing things in a certain way and it's organized by alphabetically. We know that there was something that fed into that a generation before. So that's how we can start developing these profiles.
That's wise. Okay, one more tough question. Is there such a thing as returning to some sort of normalcy after post-traumatic stress? And I mean kidnapping, I mean war, I mean domestic abuse, professional abuse. This can, like as she said, this doesn't just talk about kidnapping, it talks about every type of trauma that you might endure. Is it possible, and I don't have an answer, to walk away and return to normalcy, or is it going to be a new normal forevermore?
Yeah, I think you and I have often talked about this subject because it is fascinating, but that new normal, I think, is the only way forward. I don't think you can ever get back to who you were before. There's a part of your psyche that has been betrayed or shattered. How do you go back to being a trusting person? I don't know.
I agree.
That's a very good question. But maybe that's good because now we are using fear in a way that can protect us as well. Doesn't always debilitate us, right? It keeps us safe going forward.
I like that you put a little good spin on it. And maybe those people, whoever you are out there, military or whatever you've endured, when you go back to your new and different normal, you then have the capability to share what you went through and teach others. Because I really am a believer you can't truly counsel and advise someone in areas of this huge trauma without having endured something yourself. How can you possibly? We want to understand, we think we understand, but I don't think we really do unless we've lived a little bit of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Wow, these are some heavy duty topics that we talked about. And at the end of the day, it's also an enjoyable book in the sense that it keeps you hanging on. You are reading, turning those pages. It is so well written. She's truly gifted. There is no doubt. Well, I'd like to tell our listeners just about who we have coming up because we have some other heavy duty books that are also very entertaining and enthralling. We have Scott Carson, who also writes as Michael Carita, Kate White, Lisa Wingate, B.A. Paris, Hank Philippi Ryan. We have Patty Callahan Henry, Ramona Ausubel, Jill Shelvis, Lisa Barr. We have Jeffrey Deaver coming on with Isabella Maldonado. This is quite a lineup. I cannot wait to talk to all these people. And we always say to our listeners, you can connect with us on YouTube. We have all kinds of videos. They are so enjoyable to listen to, but also see. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram. We have TikTok. We are on X. And until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.